Niger has long been considered a strategic ally of France and the United States. But as winds of change sweep through the Sahel, this is a country that's pioneering a changing geopolitical landscape in West Africa. I'm Rahul Radhakrishnan in Niger's capital, Niamey, and in our special coverage of the country, I look into the significance of new alliances that are being forged here and find out how regional shifts could have global ramifications. Niger is one of the countries in the Sahel that's recently seen a change of leadership after a military coup. In July 2023, Niger's military seized power and ousted Mohamed Bazoum, the democratically elected president, and this is his party's headquarters. The West saw this as destabilizing the region, but Nigerians tell us that the former government was not working in the country's interests. The military coup in Niger last July was Africa's 8th coup since 2020. For many here, it was seen as a new beginning.
On Wednesday, July the 26th, 2023, security forces gathered within the CNSP put an end to the regime of the Seventh Republic. The action of the CNSP is motivated by the sole desire to preserve our beloved homeland.
Supporters of the military strongman rallied across Niamey. The party headquarters for Niger's deposed president, Mohamed Bazoum, was set ablaze. The democratically elected former leader, an ally of France and the US, has since been under house arrest, and many of his cabinet members have been imprisoned.
This coup d'etat is totally illegitimate and deeply dangerous for the people of Niger, for Niger itself, and for the whole region.
France's relationship with its former colonies, known collectively as France-Afrique, has been in freefall. Now, all these months later, you can still see the damage sustained on the exterior walls and entrances of the French embassy here in Niamey. What happened on that day in July was previously unimaginable, but Nigerians tell us they have no regrets.
For us, sovereignty means that it is a fact of having the possibility of making decisions that suits our people. It is also the fact of not being subject to any influence from another country or power. It is absolute autonomy. It is absolute independence.
For Niger, discarding old military alliances opened doors to new counterterrorism strategies, including the use of Turkish drones to fight old threats. This country is among the world's biggest producers of uranium, a radioactive metal used in cancer treatments and naval ships, but most widely in nuclear energy and weapons. Nonetheless, it's seen nearly 6 decades of grinding poverty and political instability. Many Nigerians view France and the West as exploitive powers. Now, they say they have renewed hope for their country's resources.
They say that we are a poor country, but that is not true. We are rich in mineral resources. Now that we are in search of this sovereignty, I hope that in the years to come, Niger will also become rich. For me, it's the greatest hope. It's not true that we say that Niger is poor. We are rich, extremely rich even.
For Niger's junta, playing into anti-colonial sentiment gave them the public support they needed. And 9 months on, the untested new authorities are firmly in power and are determined to leave their mark. What followed was a series of sanctions imposed by the economic community of West African states and a brief threat of military intervention. But ordinary Nigerians tell us the impact of these sanctions also emboldened their support for the new authorities. No one misses the news broadcasts in Niamey these days, especially since news broke last year of sanctions imposed on Niger by ECOWAS, an influential West African economic and political bloc. Ferreira Hassan felt betrayed. The mother of 5 believes African states should treat each other like family.
This is not what a family would do. If this was a family, what they did was horrible. The ECOWAS states didn't act like family at all. See, even our neighbors are suffering from it. There is no country in West Africa that is not feeling the impact of these sanctions. The economic crisis impacted all of the Western African countries, and even more so, Niger.
The sanctions came as a punitive measure after a military coup in Niger last July, in which the country's democratically elected leader was deposed. But ordinary Nigerians were left feeling the impact. The cost of a bag of rice went up by nearly 45% in a country that has long ranked among the world's poorest.
I don't understand the ECOWAS sanctions, to be honest, but I know what they did was bad for us. We are indeed hurt by it, but we are still in our business. We don't care about ECOWAS anymore. They are the ones who will regret their actions.
Critics say that perhaps ECOWAS acted too quickly with their trade and border blockades and threats of a military intervention. In February, it softened its stance and eased those sanctions, a move seen as both an act of appeasement and an attempt to engage in a dialogue with the junta.
But an unexpected effect of these sanctions has been a greater sense of cooperation, as well as the formation of an alliance between the military leaders in Bamako, Niamey, and Ouagadougou. And they say that this unprecedented alliance is paving their path to sovereignty.
Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger have left the bloc and plan to form a tri-state confederation. And while shedding former allies, they're building new bonds. At Niamey's Grand Marché, Ibrahim Hassan's mates call him Putin for his unrelenting support for the Russian president. His opinions, though, aren't factually accurate or even popular.
For us, Russia is a foundation. They helped us kick out France. We received support from Russia. They are like elder brothers for us. All African countries want to work with Russia.
But Russia's growing presence in the region has many worried in the West, particularly France, who were forced to withdraw troops late last year. While new political beginnings are being built in West Africa, now in post-coup Niger, for many, it's the family they choose that counts. The Military Council, known here as the National Council for the Safeguard of the Homeland, led by their president, Abdourahmane Chiani, expelled French troops from this country late last year. This came after rising anti-French sentiment and similar moves from the juntas in neighboring Mali and Burkina Faso. And this points to Paris's waning influence in West Africa. But Nigerians tell us now they also want US troops to leave. It could be mistaken for a concert, but under the midday Sahel sun, hundreds of Nigerian students have come out to affirm their country's new identity.
Today's Niger is a Niger where the Nigerian decide the country's future. The Niger of today is a Niger of the people. The Niger of today is not anymore a Niger led by a leader who is a minion of the West.
Francophone West Africa has seen a series of regime changes and radical shifts in policy recently. French troops were expelled from Niger last year, and now they're demanding US troops get out as well. The US has long seen Niger as a regional ally in its fight against terror groups in the region and operates a military base and a $100 million drone base in the sub-Saharan desert. But Niamey's pivot from its traditional Western allies is spearheaded by the country's governing military council.
These protests and speakers are certainly speaking in support of the military junta that came into power last July in a coup. But the sense of pride over here is truly palpable. However, at the same time, with the military junta in power, they are saying that they do not want any foreign military presence over here.
There's concern overseas of Russia's growing influence in Niger and West Africa. Moscow has already provided its new ally military equipment and trainers, while a West African alliance prepares itself to fight a wave of insecurity and terrorism from Daesh and Al-Qaeda-linked groups in the Sahel region.
We're here with the Students' Union to show support to the military regimes in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. We're showing our support for them to first kick out all foreign military that is not ours, that is remaining in our country. We would like to work exclusively with our own military.
Protesters tell us they don't hold any grudges against anyone, but they say that after years of being exploited, they feel like they finally have a voice in their country's affairs. It's a sentiment that only galvanizes support for the country's leaders and diplomatic shifts in the region.
What we are doing for you. It is for you that we are fighting, because Niger needs you. But you need to be prepared. We want you to eventually take the country's hand after us. That's why we are following you step by step. Be united, because if you are not united, our efforts will not succeed.
Expressing national pride is part of Niger's new identity. Many say that here on out, whatever the country's successes are, will be of their own making, and that it began with expressing discontent with the way things were for decades. With the US and France's military operation in the region suspended, the threat from terrorist groups in the Sahel did not dissipate. The military leaders in this region has decided to work together in an unprecedented alliance, while Russia saw an opportunity to grow its influence in the region. It's a persisting battle that's killed thousands and displaced over 2 million people in the West African Sahel region. Nigerien forces have been battling Daesh and Al-Qaeda-linked groups for years. The terror groups are threatening villages outside the capital, Niamey, and village chiefs are living in exile. They're known here as kings. And as the terror groups battle to gain influence, it's the kings they kill first, he says. They come to our villages, rob homes, steal livestock, and often kill people. Until earlier this year, France had a strong military presence across the Sahel. The US operates a drone base in Niger to monitor and target terrorist groups. But Niger was the latest to sever ties with the West after a coup last July. And while the threat still exists, many believe it's decreasing under the current authorities.
It's true that the Americans and the French have been there for some time now. But we as civilians don't know what they were doing. But what is sure is that we have noticed that there's still always attacks, despite their presence. Despite all their surveillance and military abilities, there were still attacks.
This year, the junta-led authorities of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger announced the formation of a joint force to fight terrorism in the region. The three countries have recently strengthened ties with Russia. Officials say they're here to develop a military cooperation.
For us, Russia is a hopeful path to a real fight against terrorism. Russia, along with any other countries willing to provide us with real support, will help us emerge from insecurity and underdevelopment and poverty. That's what we've been waiting for.
Yet, threats facing the Sahel may linger even with new military alliances. Insecurity here is tireless and difficult to measure. Years of EU pressure resulted in a law to restrict the movements of migrants through the Sahel in their bid to reach Europe. But all that changed after the coup. The military junta repealed those laws that were in place, and Niger once again became a center for migrant and smuggler activity.
I really want them to understand that we only need to get there to work. We don't want to cause problems because our country is very hot.
Alex was an ambulance driver in Monrovia during the Ebola epidemic that swept across Liberia for years.
I really wish they can understand that part, because we need better life is why we want to go there.
Many of these Sierra Leoneans and Liberians set off years ago in search of a better life in Europe. They're now in Niger, having been deported from Algeria and Libya. They say the beautiful game gives them a sense of acceptance rarely found on their journey.
As you can see, we are here today with my fellow Sierra Leoneans. We are now, look at the place we are living and see where we are having toilets. There is no good shelter, there is no food.
The International Organization for Migration has recorded a marked increase in migrants and refugees passing through Niger, especially the city of Agadez, since November last year. That's when Niger's coup leaders overturned a law that criminalized migrant smuggling since 2015. The government that had enforced the law on behalf of the EU was deposed in July. And with Agadez once again becoming a hub for Europe-bound migrants, Nigerians say North African countries must stop working with the EU to stem the flow of people to Europe.
African people have never shown solidarity, and that's what lies at the root of our problems. Even today, the brothers of the Maghreb have disassociated themselves from their African brothers. They do not consider themselves African, even though they are African like us.
The political science professor expects the growing anti-Western stance in West Africa to inspire a shift across the continent.
I think we Africans need to look at ourselves and talk to each other, rather than serving as mercenaries for Westerners who have nothing to do with us. They only want our wealth. I think those who serve France should look at themselves and be ashamed and ask forgiveness for the harm they've done to this continent, to the Sahel, over the past 50 years.
It's a sentiment that's recently been passing from one country to another in the Sahel after a string of military coups in sub-Saharan Africa. The goal, they say, is to change the status quo. The changing geopolitical climate brought about new concerns in the Sahel. But long before this upheaval, another pressing issue affecting Niger's nearly 27 million people was the impact of the climate crisis. This year has seen some of the hottest days on record. With West Africa facing record-breaking temperatures, the number of admissions at this hospital in Niamey, Niger's capital, is unusually high.
We're seeing more and more cases of dehydration, intracellular dehydration. In other words, dehydration linked to a lack of water. And it so happens that more and more elderly people who are in the age bracket exposed to this condition end up in the hospital.
Here and across the Sahel, temperatures have been soaring over 42 degrees Celsius for weeks. It's bad enough in the city, but in the barren outskirts of Niamey, there's little to protect anyone from the elements. This orange haze is from an unusual dust storm for this time of year, but that is the least of Zalika Soumana's worries.
This year there's a lot of heat. We have never seen such heat before, and our tents can barely withstand the heat, let alone the wind and dust.
Like hundreds of other Nigerians, Zalika was brought here by climate change, displaced after a series of extreme weather conditions affecting the central Sahel region in recent years. With no running water in any of these settlements over here, many of these residents tell us that they have to walk over to water tankers like this one in order to collect water while battling the elements. They say that it is an easier task on a day like this, despite the wind and the dust, and it's much more difficult on a sunny day.
We don't send the children when the sun is out, since even us adults, if we go out in the sun, it can cause illness for us, especially children.
The UN says the rate at which parts of the African continent are heating up is faster than the rest of the planet. The heat wave sweeping through the Sahel is one of the worst in living memory. Experts say it's driven by climate change, and its blistering effects are not only felt here, it's also changing the landscape. The Niger River, Africa's third largest, has experienced a remarkable drop in the flow of water over the past 2 decades. African states are disproportionately affected by climate change. The African Union says that it could stoke conflict on the continent over resources. But experts warn that in the current trajectory, heat waves like these could become 10 times more common, occurring up to 20 times a year. And what we have now is an emboldened country and people who are determined to rewrite their future. Local celebrations over new political beginnings are battling with concerns coming from beyond the Sahel. The changes are now irreversible, and self-determination is now taking center stage instead of foreign interests. And how the military leaders in this turbulent West African belt will deal with each other could determine how this country and region adapts in this period of change.